Hi there, and welcome to the Cotswold Explorer. I'm Robin Shuckburgh, and we're exploring the wonderful region of the Cotswolds in southwest England. We've decided to revisit the centre of the region and find some hidden gems, places that are not quite so famous, but still just as beautiful. And today you find Ross, Widget, Gizmo and me in one of my very favourite villages called Southrop. For years, when I was a wine merchant in this part of the world, I used to come here and drink and eat in the Swan at Southrop. It became synonymous with comfort and good food. The village is absolutely beautiful. It's home to one of the three great hospitality establishments in the Cotswolds. New they are. One of them is called Estelle Manor. That's the other side of Witney. Another is called Soho Farmhouse, which, of course, you may well have heard of. That's down near Great Kew. And here, Thyme, in this beautiful, sleepy village, is a fantastically grand, wonderful place where you can eat and shop and have a conference. We're going to show you around the village. Come with me. It's an interesting business for me to visit with my Cotswold Explorer hat on, a village I've been coming to for years. The vast majority of our exploration is to places I might have visited once or conceivably twice, but never really paying much attention. I revel in the process of exploration without ever being surprised by my lack of knowledge. I've been coming to Southrop to eat and drink at the Swan since I first came to work in Oxford as a wine merchant in 1985. They were for a while a valued customer. I felt, until today, that the village was a place with which I was familiar. I was wrong. I wasn't aware of the beautiful water meadows that bordered the village on the east, where an ancient bridge built in 1379, spans the River Leach, carries the road from Filkins, and draws you to see the complex but derelict system of sluices and streams that clearly, from medieval times, fed a mill, probably some reed beds, and perhaps even some watercress beds. From 1086, the village was named Leach, after the river, and it wasn't until 1211 that the name Southrop seems to have been adopted. Indeed, the boundary between the parishes of Eastleach and Southrop were not properly defined until the enclosure of Southrop in 1621. We're less than a mile west of the two little villages of Eastleach, which we visited a few years ago, discovering one of the Cotswolds' most delightfully peaceful places, with two churches on opposite sides of the river, joined by a stone clapper bridge, the likes of which at the time I'd never come across. It's worth looking at our film about it. Southrop turns out to be no less stunning. As we stood by the bridge, we spotted a figure walking across the meadow, pushing a wheelbarrow, accompanied by two gambling dogs, certainly one of which was a Labrador, and we like to think that we'd caught a glimpse of the man who, with his wife, owns the extraordinary manor house around which this village is gathered. The Southrop estate was part of the Roman settlements in this area, and naturally appears in the Domesday Book after 1066. It was, like most properties of this kind, owned by a monastery, in this case St Mary in Leicestershire, until the dissolution, when it became the property of the Crown, and then Queen Elizabeth's Secretary of State, Sir Robert Cecil. The Wadham family bought it in 1608, and after Dorothy Wadham founded the college in Oxford in her husband's name after his death, she gave the estate in totality to the college. In 2002, Jerry and Karen Hibbert bought the main house, and subsequently all the magnificent buildings around it, including the enormous tithe barn. And Karen set about restoring the whole estate and turning it into what is now one of the most respected hotels, restaurants and conference centres in the whole of the Cotswolds. They are invariably mentioned in the same breath as Soho Farmhouse, Dalesford and Estelle Manor, the latter of which, of course, isn't in the Cotswolds at all, however much they may wish it was. The pub, the aforementioned Swan, was bought by the Hibbards, and during COVID they took the opportunity to give it a thorough facelift. It remains an excellent traditional village pub, but with a little stardust sprinkled on it from the rest of the Thyme estate, not least from its executive chef, Charlie Hibbert, who runs the entire estate's catering operation. This is a true family affair. The cottages in the village are mainly 17th and 18th century, classic Cotswold stone walls with stone-tiled roofs. The Norman church, right next to the manor house, and conveniently for the Hibberts' privacy, separating it from the slightly more commercial side of the estate, is a startling discovery for your Cotswold explorer. The north and south walls are built extensively in a herringbone fashion, which you often see in small areas, but rarely on this scale. It may suggest Norman builders using Saxon workers. The Norman doorway, protected by its 14th century porch, is still beautifully conserved, and inside lies perhaps the most wonderful font we have come across in our travels. Pevsner, in the invaluable architectural guide that keeps me on the straight and narrow, writes of this font as follows: "One of the greatest treasures of the Cotswold churches, probably around 1180, but sculpted with far greater freedom than other local figured Norman tub fonts. This and its considerable iconographic sophistication reflect the gradual infiltration of French art, perhaps via Malmesbury. The figures are framed in trefoiled arcading with turrets or castles in the spandrels. On the east side, Moses with the tablets of the law, flanked by Ecclesia with a chalice and pennoned cross, and Synagogue blindfolded by the pennon of her broken staff. The remaining arches hold figures of armoured women, representing the virtues, trampling on the opposite vices. Modestia tramples on ebrietas, excess. Paciencia on ira, wrath. Largitas, which is generosity, on avaricia. Temperantia on luxuria. Misericordia, pity, on invidia, envy. It truly is an exceptional piece of work for a parish church. There is a 20th century choir screen and pulpit, some fragments of ancient glass in the windows, and a couple of good stone effigies in the sanctuary, thought to be Sir Thomas Conway, who died in 1606, and his wife Elizabeth. The effigies were probably carved before their deaths. There's lots to be found in the churchyard too. Some excellent chest tombs and a brilliant view of the manor, as well as the barns and buildings of the Thyme complex. This visit has been a treat. I hope you've enjoyed our little spin around Southrop. It's really pretty here, very watery. Lots of waterways of various kinds on this stream. And of course, we're close to the Thames, and it's a really wonderful place to come and visit. Don't forget, subscribe to the channel if you would. It helps us a lot. You can find us on all the normal platforms. and we will see you again very soon, somewhere else in the Cotswolds.